Basically, every video on YouTube about who funded Napoleon's wars will tell you the same story. The Rothschilds masterminded European finance, moving gold across battlefields and betting on Wellington at Waterloo. Indeed, it's a satisfying narrative. 5 brothers spread across 5 capitals, controlling information networks that moved faster than armies, building a banking empire that would dominate the 19th century. The problem is, they arrived late to a game someone else had already mastered. Decades before Nathan Rothschild made his fortune on Waterloo, a papermaker's son from rural France had already figured out how to turn revolution into profit, how to privatize military supply chains, and how to extend credit to governments that couldn't balance their own books. In fact, Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard cornered France's paper supply at 19, controlled Napoleon's entire logistics network by 30, and twice saved France from bankruptcy, first under Napoleon, then again under the Bourbons after Waterloo. Thus, in today's episode, we reveal the forgotten genius who actually bankrolled Napoleon's empire, and why the man who twice rescued France died penniless in London, erased by the same governments he had saved. When you hear about the great financiers of European history, names like Rothschild and Baring usually dominate the conversation. However, there was one man who beat them all to the game, a papermaker's son from rural France who turned revolution into the most profitable trade in Europe. Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard was born in 1770 in the small village of Cougonde. His father made paper, a modest trade that would soon underpin a global financial revolution. In the 1780s, France was a nation collapsing under its own contradictions, debt-ridden, hungry, and primed for revolt. But where most saw ruin, Ouvrard saw a once-in-a-century opportunity. At 19, he pulled off one of the boldest trades in economic history. He bought every sheet of paper he could find in Western France, 2 years' worth of production. His reasoning was simple but brilliant. If revolution came, every decree, pamphlet, and manifesto would need to be printed on something. And when the National Assembly began flooding the country with new laws, propaganda, and paper money, Ouvrard was sitting on the only supply that mattered. Within months, he turned that hoard into a fortune of 300,000 livres. It was the financial equivalent of shorting the Ancien Régime and buying the revolution. The teenager from Cougonde had just proven that in times of chaos, information and the means to spread it is the most valuable commodity on earth. Flush with capital, Ouvrard expanded into the booming colonial trade of the 1790s. He partnered with Bordeaux shipowners Baur and Balgary, cornering the French markets for sugar, coffee, cotton, and indigo. When the Haitian Revolution sent shockwaves through the global sugar supply, Ouvrard quietly rerouted his operations through Cuba and Jamaica, profiting from shortages that crushed his competitors. By 1794, he had married Elizabeth Thébault, daughter of a wealthy Nantes merchant, sealing his place among the new commercial aristocracy. The marriage was less about romance and more about access, a merger between capital and respectability. It gave him the credibility to scale his ventures nationally, just as revolutionary France transitioned from chaos to organized conquest. By the end of the decade, Ouvrard controlled a network of trading houses stretching from Brest to Orléans. While noble families were losing estates, he was building an empire based on credit, logistics, and political foresight. He had become a symbol of the new order, the man who could read markets faster than governments could print laws. Ouvrard's story teaches a timeless lesson about finance. When nations break down, private capital steps in. The revolution needed pamphlets, armies, and money, and he supplied all three. And as France's turmoil hardened into Napoleon's empire, Ouvrard was about to learn that financing words was nothing compared to financing wars. He had conquered paper. Next, he would bankroll power itself. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose from general to first consul, France was exhausted but ambitious. The revolution had drained the treasury. The navy was starving for supplies, and the army's victories depended on a fragile web of private credit. Into this vacuum stepped Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard, the man who would quietly become the empire's financial engine. After 1794, Ouvrard was no longer just a trader. He had evolved into something new, the modern state contractor. He built 3 major trading houses, Brest, Nantes, and Orléans, each acting as a logistics hub for the war economy. From these offices, he directed food shipments, munitions contracts, and naval supplies with an efficiency the French government could only envy. When governments lacked structure, Ouvrard provided it. When bureaucrats delayed, his ships sailed. His political instincts were just as sharp. During the Thermidorian period, Ouvrard aligned himself with figures who understood the new rules of survival, men like Talleyrand and Fouché, who could turn on any regime yet always land on their feet. But his most valuable alliance came through a woman, Thérèse Tallien, Notre-Dame de Thermidor, the social queen of post-revolutionary Paris. Ouvrard's affair with her opened the doors of influence across France and Spain. Her father, François Cabarrus, had founded the Bank of San Carlos in Madrid, and through that connection, Ouvrard gained access to Spanish credit networks. He was no longer a merchant. He was an international banker moving money across collapsing empires. In 1798, Ouvrard reached his first peak, a 6-year naval supply contract worth 64 million francs. France's navy was bankrupt, its colonies disrupted, and its fleets desperate. Ouvrard stepped in to feed them all. Within a year, he added the Spanish fleet at Brest and the Army of Italy to his client list. These contracts made him indispensable to France's military machine. He had effectively privatized the empire's supply chain, and for a time he did it better than the state itself. But great fortunes attract great suspicion. In January 1800, Napoleon ordered Ouvrard's arrest on charges of fraud and corruption. The message was clear: the new ruler of France did not like rivals who controlled more credit than he did. For weeks, Ouvrard sat in prison, his empire hanging by a thread. Yet when the government reviewed his accounts, every figure matched perfectly. Even Napoleon's legal advisor, Cambacérès, had to admit his innocence. Ouvrard walked free, vindicated and more powerful than ever. The timing was perfect. Napoleon was preparing for his campaign across the Alps, and the man who could supply an army faster than it could march was suddenly back in business. At Marengo in 1800, French logistics triumphed almost as much as French arms. Behind the cannon smoke and cavalry charges stood a financier from Cugonde who made sure the soldiers were paid and fed. By the turn of the century, Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard had become what every government both needs and fears: the private citizen who can move more capital than the state itself. He was not a Rothschild nor a nobleman, but something far more dangerous: a man who had learned how to fund empires without needing to rule them. By the time the empire reached its peak, Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard was not simply financing Napoleon, he was underwriting the French state itself. Every major military campaign, from the supply lines of Italy to the fleets in Brest, passed through his network. His name appeared nowhere on the battlefield, yet his ledgers determined whether soldiers marched or starved. After Marengo, Ouvrard's influence deepened. He became the quiet architect of victory, mastering the financial logistics that made Napoleon's armies unstoppable. But wars devour money faster than they consume men, and France's insatiable campaigns strained even his ingenuity. His system relied on credit, trust in promises backed by victory. When the wars turned, those promises came due. By 1815, after Waterloo, France was ruined. The Bourbons returned to a country bled dry, facing reparations of nearly 2 billion francs. The government could not pay its debts, feed its people, or fund the occupying Allied troops. And yet from the ruins of empire, one man again stepped forward to save the nation's finances: Ouvrard. His comeback under the restored monarchy was a masterclass in financial statecraft. Working with Prime Minister Richelieu, he devised a radical plan: a 100 million franc loan to stabilize France's credit and resume reparations payments. It was a daring act of financial engineering that restored investor confidence and accelerated the withdrawal of foreign troops. The occupation that was meant to last 5 years ended in 3. The newspapers called it a miracle, but the miracle was Ouvrard's math. His methods were far ahead of his time. He introduced innovative bond structures, rentes issued at par value and protected by insurance mechanisms that offset price drops. It was the birth of modern sovereign debt management. France's credit rating soared, and its debt spreads against Britain narrowed dramatically. In the middle of the 19th century, the very tools Ouvrard invented would become standard for every major European treasury. But his ambitions reached beyond balance sheets. Ouvrard financed royal dowries and arranged aristocratic marriages to rebuild France's social hierarchy. When his daughter married into the Rochechouart family in 1822, the royal family itself attended, a sign that the monarchy's survival now depended on the banker who had once served its enemy. For a brief moment, Ouvrard seemed invincible, a man who had financed both Napoleon's empire and the Bourbons' restoration, earning the trust of rulers who otherwise shared nothing. Yet this new era would test the limits of private power. The same techniques that made him indispensable would soon make him expendable. As France prepared another foreign adventure, Ouvrard's credit would once again be called upon. But this time, his clients would betray him, and the cost of saving a kingdom would be his own ruin. The final act of Gabriel-Julien Ouvrard's career began with triumph and ended in ruin. In 1823, France launched its grand expedition to Spain, a campaign to restore the Bourbon monarchy and crush liberal revolution. The operation required a financier bold enough to fund an army that the state itself could not sustain. As always, the government turned to Ouvrard. He organized the logistics, secured the supplies, and financed the movement of men and material across the Pyrenees. It was a campaign tailor-made for his genius, a massive, international operation built on contracts, confidence, and credit. When the Duke of Angoulême led his troops into Spain, Ouvrard's money marched beside them. But when the mission succeeded, gratitude vanished. The French government refused to honor his contracts, denying repayment for millions in expenses. Ouvrard found himself holding worthless paper signed by the same men who had once toasted his loyalty. His fortune collapsed in an instant. By 1825, the banker who had twice saved France was bankrupt. His chateau, ships, and collections were seized, his reputation shattered. Worse, he was imprisoned in the Conciergerie, the same fortress where Marie Antoinette had awaited the guillotine. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The man who had financed kings and emperors now stood as their scapegoat. He was released only through the personal intervention of the Duke of Angoulême, the very commander whose campaign had destroyed him. The Duke secured his freedom, but not his restitution. Ouvrard had spent a lifetime rescuing governments from insolvency, only to discover that loyalty to power guarantees nothing once power changes hands. The July Revolution of 1830 swept away the Bourbons and replaced them with Louis Philippe's constitutional monarchy. Ouvrard, now in his 60s and stripped of fortune, no longer belonged to the new age of bureaucratic finance. His instinct-driven empire of personal credit and private trust had no place in a world of institutions and ministries. In 1826 and 1827, he published his memoirs, A Last Defense and a Glimpse into a Vanished World. The book was part confession, part cautionary tale, filled with stories of Napoleon's campaigns and the secret mechanisms of war finance. Critics noted that his figures rarely matched official records, but the insights were unmistakable. Behind every regime stood a man who kept the money flowing. Ouvrard died in London in 1846, far from the courts and ministries that had once depended on him. He left no fortune, no office, only a legacy of methods that would outlive him. The bond markets of the 19th century, the sovereign loans of the 20th, even the bailouts of the 21st, all trace their logic back to his experiments in the age of revolution. History remembers Napoleon's battles and the kings who replaced him, but not the financier who made them possible. Why, at every government that borrows to survive still walks the path Ouvrard paved. His story is the blueprint of modern finance, a reminder that empires fall, but debt endures. And now we'd like to see you in the comments. Prior to this video, had you heard of Ouvrard before? We look forward to hearing from you below, and thanks for joining us for another episode.